negotiations.
The question is that new clause 4 be read a second time. Mark Harper.
Madam Chairman, I'm very grateful. I can see members are looking forward to this.
Absolutely.
There are, of course, a number of amendments grouped in this clause. Members will, I hope, be pleased to know that I don't plan on speaking to all of them. If I group them in a way that I think is sensible, there seem to me to be a number of groups. There are some that I think are unnecessary, arguably that do very little, but have a risk of doing harm. There are those that are outright vetoes on the process, which I think are completely unacceptable. There's one about a national convention, about which I'll speak briefly, and then a very important couple about Northern Ireland, which I would like to speak to as well. So, first of all, new clause 4, which the honourable lady spoke to. I think my right honourable friend, the member for West Dorset, put his finger on it, but I think it needs to go a little bit further. He asked her about consensus. Now, the amendment talks about the Secretary of State seeking to reach a consensus, and my right honourable friend pointed out that it was very unlikely a consensus would be reached because the Scottish nationalists fundamentally don't agree with us leaving the European Union. Not only that, unlike the other First Ministers, they also don't even wish to see a continuation of the United Kingdom. So it seems to, as they have just confirmed verbally in the chamber. So it seems to me a consensus is not going to be reached. Now, the problem with putting this new clause in statute is that it then, as my right honourable friend said earlier, makes it justiciable. And the problem then is a court will be asked to adjudicate about whether the Secretary of State has tried hard enough to reach a consensus. Now, even if the court in the end rules that everything is fine, this is just a way of delaying the process. I give way to my right honourable friend.
I'm very, very grateful to my right honourable friend. Did he notice that I did that the opposition spokesman referred to embedding the Scottish Government in the proposals? Would he agree with me this is, roughly speaking, like Wellington being asked to embed Napoleon in his strategy for the Napoleonic Wars?
My right honourable friend has a much greater command of history than I have, but even on my limited reading of it, I think he's probably about right. And indeed, my right honourable friend, the member for East Devon, I think where he was driving at in his intervention when he asked the honourable lady to distinguish between the First Ministers of the different devolved nations, I think the distinction is this one. The First Minister of Northern Ireland wishes to see the continuation of the United Kingdom. The First Minister of Wales wishes to see the continuation of the United Kingdom. The First Minister of Scotland does not. So actually that is material to the sensibleness of proceeding with new clause 4. Of course I'll give way.
I'm very grateful to my right honourable friend for praying me in aid, and he's absolutely right. But also, the real point I was making is that neither the First Ministers of Northern Ireland nor Wales have sought to mislead their own communities by suggesting they can join the EU outside the UK, which is what the SNP was suggesting throughout the campaign.
Well, I think my right honourable friend, I think, makes that point.
If it's in order for what the honourable gentleman, I forget his constituency, the former minister, just said, because he accused the First Minister of Scotland of misleading the country by stating something that members of this House and the Scottish National Party have also said. So by extension, is he accusing myself and my honourable friends of misleading the Chamber?
I will respond to his point of order. It's not unparliamentary. She's not a member of this House. Mark Harper.
Madam Chairman, let me. I'm conscious I took interventions from this side of the House and not from the other. The right honourable gentleman.
I'll give him one example. Policing in Scotland is devolved to the Scottish Parliament. Yep. Policing in Northern Ireland is devolved to the Northern Ireland Assembly. on a consensus, it may be that the government wishes to withdraw from the European Union and therefore withdraw from such things as Eurojust and Europol. Now, there might need to be a view on those issues, so a consensus could be reached, so that Scotland and Northern Ireland, who have devolved issues, can still maintain policing at a local level with Ireland and with other parts of the European Union.
Well, I don't think I have any issue with the government seeking to reach a consensus. I think my point was this. There's two issues. One is I think the Honourable Lady herself accepted that consensus is likely to be very, very difficult, although we should try. I have no problem with ministers trying to seek a consensus. The danger with putting it in legislation is we then hand over the adjudication of whether the minister has sought to seek that consensus, whether the minister's tried hard enough, to a court. And even if the court ends up reaching what I would consider the right conclusion and not interfering in the process, it seems to me rather obviously a route for delay. So I think I would want to hear the minister say, and I think this is the position because the Prime Minister has made it clear that she's going to seek to take into account the views of the devolved administrations, but I wouldn't want to see it put into legislation. The Honourable Gentleman.
I'm very grateful to the Honourable Gentleman for allowing me into his speech, but I wonder, while he's talking about distinguishing things, if he could distinguish this fact and remind him and the House that the Scottish National Party aren't the entirety of Scotland. And the reason for allowing there to be a building of, as much as you like to think they are, and you can tell that from the reaction at the moment, if you read the amendment directly and what it's carefully worded, it says they should seek assistance and consensus for building the negotiation with the European Union. That's about letting the Scottish people into the process, not the Scottish National Party, and he should distinguish between the two.
I completely agree with the Honourable Gentleman that the SNP, while they are the Scottish Nationalists, while they are in government in Scotland at the moment, are not the same as the Scottish people. But the new clause which the Honourable Lady moved, the representatives of the Joint Ministerial Committee are the First Minister of Scotland and a further representative, not of the Scottish people, but of the Scottish Government. So there will be two members of the Scottish Nationalists who have as their expressed purpose, confirmed here today, to destroy the United Kingdom. The Honourable Gentleman from Northern Ireland.
I think that's Can I thank the member for giving way? But does he not understand how serious this issue is? Does he not understand that he won't have a UK if he keeps going on with arrogance, with intolerance and with insensitivity? We spent 30 years getting a peace process together. We don't want to see any more dead bodies. And quite simply, what's going on here and the intolerance that some members are showing are scaring me and masking me. I'm asking myself, why am I in this place at all?
The Honourable Gentleman, I haven't been intolerant to anyone. I've taken interventions from both sides of the House, and I said in the opening remarks that I was going to turn to the two new clauses, 109 and 150, which specifically refer to Northern Ireland, in my remarks. I simply haven't had a chance yet to get to them. I'm a great supporter of the Union of the United Kingdom, but I also, when I was Immigration Minister, worked very closely with the government of the Republic of Ireland to facilitate this common travel area and the close working together of the people of the United Kingdom and the Republic of Ireland. So I agree with the Honourable Gentleman there, and I wish to proceed on that basis. Let me turn now. No, let me make some progress, because otherwise others won't get the opportunity to get in. I'm pleased that the Honourable Gentleman, the Labour member from Scotland, was able to intervene on me. He is the lead name on new clause 23, and I have a question on new clause 23. It refers to in 2C, it refers to the legal status of EU nationals resident in Scotland. It also then refers to Scottish nationals. I don't quite understand what they are. I understand what UK nationals are, but I wasn't aware there was a separate class of nationals of Scotland. And I don't know whether the Honourable Gentleman wishes to intervene on me and explain to the House what they are, but given that I don't even know what they are, if for no other reason, that would be reason enough to vote against his new clause. Of course I'll give way.
It's people who would normally have been resident in Scotland before they moved abroad. It's quite simple.
Well, but Scottish nationals implies that they're somehow tied to Scotland other than by residence. So what he's saying is if someone's English but happens to live in Scotland for 5 minutes, does that mean they're a Scottish national? Well, he says no, but he just said that his definition was someone who resided in Scotland and then moved overseas. So it seems to me that you don't have to have any connection with Scotland bar the fact you live there for 5 minutes. So that seems a very poorly worded new clause and isn't worthy of support. I'll give way to him one more time.
I say gently to the honourable gentleman, just because his government have pushed through this programme motion means that we can't have a full debate on these issues. But whether it's a beautifully worded clause or a badly worded clause, EU nationals should be given the right to stay by this government today, and UK nationals living in the EU, we should be fighting to make sure they have their rights as well. You could do that now, and if you did that now, we wouldn't need to push these clauses through at all.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm not going to address that issue now. We did that at length in the previous set of amendments, and a number of colleagues spoke on that, so I think that had sufficient debate. Moving on to the next group of new clauses, there are a number of them which I've grouped together, and they are all different mechanisms for giving different parts of the United Kingdom a veto on this entire process, and for that reason I don't think they can be accepted. New Clause 26, to be moved by the Scottish Nationalists, effectively gives the Joint Ministerial Committee a veto on the process, which means a single member of the Joint Ministerial Committee could veto the entire process. I don't think that would be welcome. The Honourable Gentleman.
Grateful for the Honourable Gentleman giving way. But can you not understand that what the Scottish Government has done in presenting its proposal to the UK Government is very much seek that consensus, that compromise? We understand that the people of England have voted to leave the EU, and we do not seek to frustrate that. But what we do ask is that this Parliament also recognises that not just the SNP, but the Scottish Parliament has empowered the Government to act in our interest to make sure that we remain within the single market. That respect has to work two ways, and it's about the UK Government working with us. If they don't do that, we know what the answer is, and quite frankly, we shouldn't be in this place.
I hope the honourable gentleman will forgive me, and I'm sure colleagues on this side of the House will find this slightly repetitive, but he said the people of England voted. Well, no, actually, there was a United Kingdom referendum. There have been 2 referendums over the last few years. I respect the outcome of both of them. There was a vote by the people of Scotland to remain in the United Kingdom, which therefore follows that the referendum on the United Kingdom's membership of the European Union was a UK decision. There was a single vote, and the United Kingdom decided to leave the European Union. Scotland didn't have a separate decision. There was a UK decision, and I respect both of the referendums, and I'm going to proceed on that basis. The Honourable Lady.
Grateful to the Honourable Gentleman for giving way. Perhaps I can help him to understand where we on these benches are coming from. During the Scottish independence referendum, the leader of the Conservative and Unionist Party in Scotland, Ruth Davidson, told Scottish voters that the way to guarantee their EU citizenship was to vote to remain part of the United Kingdom. He enjoyed a cosy little exchange a moment ago about the First Minister allegedly misleading people. It's quite clear the leader of his party in Scotland misled voters during the independence referendum. Would he now like to take the opportunity to apologise for that misleading statement?
I wouldn't. I think the leader of the Conservatives in Scotland, the leader of the opposition in the Scottish Parliament, I'm very pleased to say, and I note the latest opinion poll showing the Conservative support rising and Labour support falling. She campaigned very strongly, both for the maintenance of the United Kingdom, but she campaigned very strongly for the United Kingdom to remain in the European Union. I was disappointed by the result, as was she, but I don't think she misled anybody, and therefore I don't feel the need to apologise. No, I've taken the intervention. I'm going to make some progress. I'm going to make some progress. Of course.
My right honourable friend might not have had the chance to follow the Scottish independence referendum as closely as some of us, but it was the case during that independence referendum that the current First Minister for the Scottish National Party said that if the United Kingdom remained, then the NHS in Scotland would be privatised. So if there's anyone who should apologise for misleading the public, it's Nicola Sturgeon.
As ever, my right honourable friend hits the nail on the head. So I think, just to move relatively briefly through these, new clause 139 and new clause 140 both give a veto effectively to different parts of the United Kingdom, and therefore I think are unacceptable. Of course.
I thank my honourable friend actually for giving way. Would he take the opportunity, when he now turns to the issues that affect Northern Ireland, to address the spurious point that was raised by the member for Ealing, that the Belfast Agreement is, I think, peppered with references to the European Union. There is one reference on page 16. There are 3 references on page 7 which address the ECHR, which is nothing to do with the EU. And indeed, the references to the EU in the Belfast Agreement refer specifically to the mutual interdependence of the North-South Ministerial Council and the Assembly. And that getting into a lather over that matter is the wrong thing for the member to do.
Very grateful to the honourable gentleman for that elucidation of the House. And indeed, I detected from the expression on the face of the Shadow Minister that she hadn't found that intervention entirely helpful from her honourable friend. So I think perhaps she may share a view with the honourable gentleman there from Northern Ireland. Finally, in this section, new clauses 160 and 161, which have been tabled by the Welsh nationalists, which talk about future trade deals, again give a veto to the devolved assemblies in the United Kingdom, and I don't think, therefore, on that basis they should be supported by the House. I just wanted to touch very briefly on new clause 168, which is about a national convention. Now, those of us that have been involved in constitutional matters for some time, I couldn't help but smile at this, because when I was taking a number of constitutional items through the House, national conventions or conventional committees or some other variant of them are usually a way of delaying matters, involving a whole load of people in things, usually people who are already perfectly well involved in all of these things, since most of the members of the convention already appear to be elected members of some body or other, and they seem an extraordinary excuse to make no progress whatsoever. Since the honourable lady is leading that amendment, I will of course give way to her.
I thank the honourable member for giving way, and I look forward to talking about this more in my remarks. But perhaps I could raise this issue with him, that I'm sure that he will appreciate, as I do, the paucity of paucity of quality debate in the referendum, which remains an issue, and the need to engage people in this discussion in the next 2 years as we move forward. We shouldn't reach the end of this negotiation period with people saying they were as ill-informed at the end as they were at the start.
That's actually a very helpful intervention, because she's now tempted me to say a little bit more about her new clause, which I hadn't planned on doing. I've looked at the membership of the National Convention, but it doesn't seem to actually involve any members of the public at all. It's all people that were very well represented during the referendum campaign. It's elected mayors, elected representatives of local government, people from universities and higher education, representatives of trade unions and trade bodies, representatives of business organisations, and members of the Scottish Parliament, the National Assembly of Wales, the Northern Ireland Assembly, yes them, members of the European Parliament, and then finally you get to other representatives, but not just any representatives to represent civil society, but only those who the Secretary of State determines. So, interestingly, she's going to give ministers the job of deciding who should represent civil society, which seems remarkably generous of her, but rather self-defeating, I would have thought. Of course, I'll give way to her.
I thank the honourable member for giving way, and perhaps he will also agree that it's vital to have the regions of England involved, as much as it is the nations of Scotland and Wales and Northern Ireland involved in a national debate. And I'm sure that he will, on reflection and thinking again, realise that there was great value in the idea of a greater national conversation, and where elected representatives will be able to engage with their communities and represent their views.
To be honest, I thought there was quite a lot of national conversation last year. and it seemed to me, talking to my constituents, that by the end of the national conversation, they really did want to make a decision and move on. And it seems to me the most important thing they want us to do is to give notice under Article 50, start the negotiating process. The most common refrain I ever get from people is they think because there was a referendum last year, they wonder why we haven't already left. So I give way to my honourable friend.
I thank my right honourable friend for allowing me to intervene. Would he agree with me that running through the list as he just did, that people in the country who were told that this referendum was an opportunity for them to express their opinion will find it perplexing and disturbing and not a little bit frustrating that the new clause put forward takes that voice away from them and hands it back to the people who are already very vocal?
Well, I think my honourable friend put that very well. It doesn't seem to involve members of the public at all. It involves people who are perfectly well involved in the debate. Now, I won't give way to the honourable lady again. I gave way to her twice, and we can look forward to her remarks.
Point of order, Barry Sherman.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the member for Forest of Dean has been speaking for 22 minutes.
After half an hour.
And this is, Madam Deputy, in a debate where it seems, charming as he is, he's been filibustering this House, filibustering in the last debate, filibustering to stop honest debate, honest opinion being expressed here this evening. What is going on?
Order. I've been listening very carefully to what the honourable gentleman has said. There are no time limits, as the honourable gentleman is aware, at this stage of a bill. There is a limited amount of time available, as the honourable gentleman knows. He has spoken at great length. He spoke at great length in the previous group. So I think, but I have been listening very carefully. He has remained in order. He has spoken to the amendments. There's nothing out of order in what he has said. But perhaps the honourable gentleman will be aware of the mood of the House. Mark Harper.
First of all, as I did in the previous group, I was taking interventions from colleagues on both sides of the House, and clearly I'll take your admonition not to take as many of them going forward. I set out at the beginning of my remarks the points I was going to cover, and colleagues that have been following carefully will know that I only have one left. And I'm not going to not cover it because it's the very important matter of Northern Ireland, a very important part of the United Kingdom. But colleagues will be pleased to know that is the last point on which I will be speaking. And I therefore want to just say a few words. There are two new clauses that have been put forward on Northern Ireland. One is about priority in negotiations, and it sets out, this is new clause 150, this is to make sure that there's no external impediment to people in Northern Ireland exercising their right of self-determination. And although it talks about bringing about a united Ireland, which I don't agree with, it seems to me there's nothing in the process of exiting the European Union that would have any impact on that. The legislation that governs the mechanisms available to my right honourable friend the Secretary of State to do with things like border polls and so forth have nothing whatsoever to do with this process. So I think there's no need to accept this new clause. The honourable gentleman who's tabled it.
I thank the honourable member for Forest of Dean giving way. He will recall that even in his own remarks he talked about the questions that were raised in the context of the Scottish referendum as to whether or not an independent Scotland would have easy or ready access to the EU or would have to negotiate brand new under Article 49. If Northern Ireland is taken out of the EU as part of the UK, there is no article in the Lisbon Treaty for part of a former member state coming into the EU. Anybody could raise a question mark as to whether or not a referendum in that context would admit Northern Ireland into the EU as part of a united Ireland. The question mark could be raised because the German precedent might not apply, and the Taoiseach addressed this point last summer, and the British government need to take it on board.
I think that the honourable gentleman may be guilty of jumping, I think, quite a lot of steps in advance, because it seems to me there's no evidence at all that the people of Northern Ireland have got any intention at any time in the foreseeable future of joining the Republic of Ireland. So I think this is a case of inventing theoretical problems to get in the way of what is a perfectly sensible process. I'll take one more intervention from the honourable gentleman, then I'll make some progress.
does the honourable member recognise, does the honourable member not recognise that the key wording in new clause 150 actually comes from the Good Friday Agreement itself, a paragraph that appears in the agreement not just once but twice? It's in the constitutional issue section of the agreement, and it's in part of the agreement, that part of the agreement that is the agreement between the British and Irish governments. If it was good enough and important enough to be in the Good Friday Agreement, endorsed by a referendum of the Irish people, north and south, why shouldn't it be respected now when we're being asked to reflect how English people voted in a referendum?
Well, again, I come back to what the honourable gentleman just said there about how English people voted. First of all, if you look at the separate parts of the United Kingdom, it was both England and Wales that voted to leave the European Union. But as I said in answer to the Scottish National Member of Parliament, this was a UK decision. The fact that different parts of the United Kingdom may have voted in different ways actually isn't relevant. It was a United Kingdom decision, and the United Kingdom voted to leave. Now, I've got one more new clause to talk to, and then I will be sitting down. The final one is new clause 109. Let me just make a little bit of progress on this, and then I'll take an intervention. New clause 109 talks about the Prime Minister making sure that the provisions of the Good Friday Agreement and other agreements agreed between the UK and Ireland, and it lists out a whole load of issues. Now, it seems to me the free movement of people, goods and services on the island of Ireland, the free movement of people, citizenship and so forth, are not guaranteed by the membership of the EU, but previous pieces of legislation like the Ireland Act. It's very clear that citizens of the Republic of Ireland and citizens of the United Kingdom have reciprocal, and that's important, reciprocal arrangements to live in each other's countries, indeed vote in each other's countries. Irish nationals in Britain can vote in our elections. If we were to go and live in the Irish Republic, we can vote in theirs. And I think those are all going to be preserved when we leave the European Union. So again, I think that new clause is unnecessary, but I'll take an intervention from the Honourable Lady.
I'm very grateful to the Honourable Gentleman for giving way. I'm very disappointed to hear that he's coming to the end of his contribution, because sitting here, judging from the communications I'm receiving from constituents and voters in Scotland, every word he seeks is putting our vote through the roof and greatly increasing the cause of a second independence referendum. So please, I urge him, I urge him and those around him to keep continuing in the same vein. It's doing us the world of good.
I suspect, based on the Twitter trolling that I receive, I suspect most of the people contacting the Honourable Lady are people who were already going to support the Nationalists in the first place. It seems to me that with the successful campaigning efforts of my friend, the leader of the Scottish Conservatives, those of a unionist disposition in Scotland are very much moving to support the Conservative Party in Scotland, which is why she is the leader of the opposition.
Order. We really must get back to the group. Mark Harper.
I was being tempted there to speak for longer than I had intended, Ms Engel. So, in conclusion, what I would say, having run through the new clauses and amendments in this group, I hope I've set out for the House reasons why all of them should be opposed by those that wish to see Article 50 triggered, and if any of them are pressed to a division, I hope the House will reject them.